Great. All right, so my name again is Gordon Strause. I was at Nextdoor from 2012 till just recently, so about 12 years, but we're going to go back in time actually to 2015, 2016, and I want to talk about some work that we did that reduced racial profiling, as Julie was pointing out, a very specific problem by about 75% on the platform, and the lessons that I think can be learned from that. And I want to start off by saying we first heard about this issue thanks to some activist groups, particularly one in Oakland called Neighbors for Racial Justice, that did a great job of kind of pushing us on these ideas. We'd heard about profiling in the platform, but I think our first reaction to that was, look, we're creating a place for neighbors to communicate. We think most of the time that's going to be positive, and most of the time it certainly was, but there were going to be these cases, and we had moderation systems, and that was how we were going to handle it. But these folks really pushed us, and they also did a good job of getting the press involved as well. And after meeting with them, you know, one of the things that really stuck with this is they said, you know, you talk about yourself as a community, as a platform for building community, but you're actually making us feel less safe in our neighborhoods. And that really stuck with us. And so we began to think about, all right, what can we do to address this issue? And we ended up doing, beginning by really trying to understand the problem. So we pulled every single case that we could find related to this. We did keyword searches. We looked at reported posts. We pulled all these examples together and read through them. At the same time, we were also in parallel reading about work from experts in the field. There was a lot of literature about profiling, and we dug into that. But then we took a step further, and we actually began talking to those experts. And I call out Jennifer Eberhardt as a professor at Stanford. We did a lot of work for her. And she talks about that work some in this book. That's part of why I'm bringing it up. But the main reason why I'm bringing it up is because I think this is one of the most important books I've ever read, actually. It's one of like two books that I think that if every American read it would change the country for the better. So I would encourage folks to take a look. But anyway, we ended up learning two things out of that process. And we realized there were actually two different things going on when people would talk about profiling. One is what I think you would consider kind of traditional racial profiling, right? Someone posts about somebody in the neighborhood that's acting suspiciously when, you know, the suspicious behavior is they're actually just walking around and being of the wrong race. And so that was happening, not often, but was happening at times on the platform. But what was happening more often, and that we kind of learned and hadn't thought about as profiling before, but as we dug in, began to think about it, is what I would call insufficient descriptions. So these were people posting about actual suspicious behavior, and I think somebody opening car doors, every car door on a block, is definitely suspicious, and they're probably breaking in and trying to rob the cars. But if the description is, the whole description is young black man, right? You know, that's not a helpful description. You're not going to catch anyone through that kind of description. And if you're a young black person living in the neighborhood, the 99% of folks, or 99.9 or whatever it is, who aren't this, all of a sudden your neighbors are looking at you more suspiciously. And we realized that that was a huge problem as well, and that we needed to address both of those issues. And so we began to look at our posting flow. And what could we do? Because that was really where the action was happening. How could we improve this? And this is more of a snapshot of what the posting flow looks today, but it's not changed all that much in certain ways. But I think the big lesson that you take from it, right, is that there's as little friction as possible. I mean, Nextdoor's kind of bread and butter is engagement and people posting. We want to make it as easy as possible to post, was this sort of general rule of thumb. And so you basically have a posting box, and, you know, we're learning from Facebook and Twitter and all these places, right? Put up a posting box, let people post, and then, you know, you can deal with it in moderation and stuff like that. But then we sort of took a step back and said, what can we do to make this a better flow, a more accurate, a flow that would help people? Because I guess one thing I skipped over that I should say is, I think part of what we realized when we were looking at these kinds of posts was that these weren't people trying to do bad stuff, right? These weren't generally bad actors. There was occasional bad actors, but in general, these were people trying to help their neighbors. but they just didn't know how to do it. They weren't aware of their own biases, or they weren't aware of how their posts, their individual posts, would collectively become something that was antisocial, really. And so we began to think, how can we help people, and to Glenn's point, become a better version of themselves? And so we ended up with a flow that did a couple things. First, when you click on crime post about safety, and if you don't click on it, but we detect a post of safety, we'll force you through this flow, where first we start with the interstitial, where we are, the idea is to have people pause and stop and think, because a big part of the research on profiling is that when people go into sort of quick mode and they're just sort of instinctual, they tend to behave in one way, whereas if you actually have them pause and slow down and think a little bit, they will behave differently. And so partly we just wanted people to pause. We actually then told them what kind of posts we wanted. We wanted them to begin by focusing on behavior, and only then provide a description. Then we actually plant a seed. We actually call up the word profiling just so people become aware of it and think about it a little bit. And then we also link to the community guidelines where there's more information. So you've got this flow, but you say if you're, and we have a no, I'm not, because sometimes when people are posting, they're talking about weather events and things like that that aren't about crime or safety issues or crime or suspicious activity. But if they are, they hit continue, and then we bring them into this flow where a couple things to call out here. First, we ask people first to talk about the incident. Don't tell us anything about the people. Tell us exactly the behavior that you find suspicious, with the idea being that sometimes if you go through this flow and you realize, oh, wait a second, this behavior, walking, this is not really suspicious behavior. So people will sometimes pause and stop and rethink. And then second, to actually give a description of the person, you actually have to click a button. And when you click that button, this field opens up that structures the description and forces you to provide a lot of useful information so that the description of the person that you're describing is a specific person and not a kind of general category of the people. So slow down, give us useful information, and create a structure that forces that to happen. And the result of that was we ended up reducing the amount of profiling by posts by 75%. So the lessons learned from this, 5 ones real quickly. One, listen carefully. I think that if we jumped to a solution and began to work on this right away, we would have missed that whole part about the detail, about the description. We would have tried to stop profiling, traditional profiling, but we wouldn't have addressed that other issue, which we actually think was just as important. The second one probably is useless for this group because you guys already know this, but I would say seek help and expertise. There's lots of academics out there who would love to work with you and who are eager to do so, and take advantage of that. Third, you have to be willing to revisit things. Like, we had this mantra that you wanted to make posting as easily as possible. In this case, we had we felt it was important enough to revisit and pause and think about that. Fourth, I'm giving you kind of the finished version, but there was a lot of iterations along the way. We did a lot of testing and measuring. The specific things I was talking to were not our first solutions. We came to that after getting both qualitative and quantitative feedback. And then the fifth thing, I'm not going to really talk about it, but this was part of a larger ecosystem that we were working on. There was lots of different other things that we did as well, and I'm happy to talk about those as well. But I would say for me, the biggest lesson that I would learn is that design is way more important than moderation. That moderation is really a failure case. You want to stop that from happening in the first case, and that's really what this was about. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much.